The Trojan War, myth, legend, or hidden truth. A war fought over love, heroes like Achilles and Hector, and a wooden horse that changed history. But did it really happen? For centuries, the Trojan War was comfortably dismissed as pure myth, a magnificent, sprawling story told by the poet Homer in the Iliad and Odyssey. It was seen as a tale of immortal gods interfering in mortal affairs, of superhuman rage and impossible honor, a narrative too grand, too perfect to be anything but poetic invention. To most of the Western world, it was the foundational epic of civilization, but little more than an elaborate fairy tale. Yet, this easy dismissal was violently shaken in the 19th century when a German businessman turned archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann became obsessed with the literal truth of Homer's verses. Schliemann, driven by a romantic and often criticized conviction, followed the geographical clues in the Iliad to the hills of Hisarlik in modern-day Turkey. What he found there was a discovery that didn't just shake the academic world, it utterly redefined the relationship between myth and history. In Hisarlik, Schliemann didn't find the single, mythical city of Troy. He unearthed a massive tell, a mound consisting of 9 superimposed city layers, built and destroyed over millennia. The ruins bore a striking resemblance to the ancient city described by Homer: formidable walls, imposing gates, and artifacts, all pointing to a wealthy, powerful citadel that had once stood proud and, crucially, had fallen violently. Schliemann, believing he had found the city of King Priam, focused his efforts on a deeper, older layer he designated Troy II. While his methods were crude and destructive by modern standards, he unearthed vast treasures, which he controversially labeled Priam's treasure. This dramatic finding, though later proven to belong to a period nearly 1,000 years before the likely date of the Trojan War, galvanized global interest and established a definitive physical location for Homer's Troy. It was subsequent, more systematic archaeological work that provided the most compelling link between Hisarlik and the Bronze Age conflict. Modern scholars now point to the layers known as Troy VI and Troy VII as the most likely candidates for the city besieged by the Achaeans, Greeks. Troy VI was a formidable city, characterized by monumental, sloping defensive walls of dressed stone, precisely the kind of fortification that would require a decade-long siege to overcome. It was a thriving cosmopolitan center, strategically located to control the vital sea passage through the Dardanelles, the Hellespont, which connects the Aegean Sea to the Black Sea. This city, however, seems to have been destroyed not by war, but by a massive earthquake around 1250 BC. The city rebuilt upon its ruins, Troy VII, offers perhaps the most suggestive evidence of violent conflict. This phase was smaller and less grand, suggesting a rushed reconstruction, yet it showed signs of desperate fortification. Crucially, Troy VII reveals a clear layer of destruction by human hands. Archaeologists found charred debris, evidence of an intense fire, and signs of a final, overwhelming assault. They discovered caches of sling stones and bronze arrowheads scattered on the ground, and even human remains hastily interred, suggesting a siege followed by a sack. While the exact date of Troy VIII's destruction is debated, it falls squarely within the timeframe roughly 1200 BC that historians and classicists have long associated with the climax of the Bronze Age, an era known for widespread societal collapse and conflict throughout the Mediterranean world. Historians now ask, was the war truly fought over Helen of Sparta, or was she a poetic symbol for something deeper? While the poets elevated the conflict to an affair of personal passion and divine will, the reality almost certainly lay in the ruthless pragmatism of Bronze Age geopolitics. The clash between the Mycenaean Greeks, the Achaeans, and the Anatolian Trojans was not merely a drama of eros and revenge, but a struggle for regional power and economic dominance. Troy's location was its fortune and its curse. Situated at the mouth of the Dardanelles, it held a choke point on trade routes connecting the Aegean to the rich markets of the Black Sea and the grain-producing lands of Ukraine. Any ship passing through this strait was subject to Troy's control, and likely, its tolls. For the rising, expansionist Mycenaean kingdoms, places like Mycenae, Argos, and Pylos, removing the Trojan obstacle would have been an imperative of trade and empire building. The narrative of Paris abducting Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships, may therefore be a powerful, romantic poetic symbol used to rationalize a brutal, expensive, and protracted military campaign. It provided a morally righteous cause and a compelling emotional hook for a story that was, at its heart, about control of wealth and strategic access. The conflict was a very real Bronze Age power struggle later romanticized into epic poetry. Today, many scholars believe the Trojan War was not pure fiction. The Iliad is a product of centuries of oral tradition, a colossal achievement that preserves a historical memory of a great conflict. While Homer, writing centuries after the events, are likely around the 8th century BC, certainly embellished the story with gods and monsters, the foundations of his narrative are deeply rooted in the Mycenaean era. The poem contains details that ring true for the late Bronze Age, the descriptions of weaponry, the political structure of the Mycenaean kingdoms, and even the names of cities and leaders have been archaeologically validated. The epic serves as a cultural echo chamber, preserving the memory of a pivotal moment when the powerful Mycenaean world launched a massive overseas expedition against a major Anatolian rival. Further evidence for a real Bronze Age conflict comes not from Greece, but from the archives of Troy's contemporaries. In the ruins of Hattusa, the capital of the mighty Hittite Empire, which ruled much of Anatolia during this period, archaeologists have found clay tablets detailing diplomatic and military engagements. These tablets mention a land called Ahiewa, which is often interpreted by scholars as the Hittite name for the Achaeans or Mycenaean Greeks. They also refer to a city called Wilusa and a region called Taurusa, terms that linguistically align with the Greek names Ilios and Troy. One crucial tablet, the Towogolowa letter, details a history of tensions and military skirmishes between the Hittite Empire and the Ahiewans over Wilusa. This suggests that the Mycenaeans were active in western Anatolia and were in direct conflict with the people who lived in and around Troy, a conflict that predated, and perhaps culminated in, the Great Siege. If the war was real, how much of the epic's detail can be trusted? The figures of Achilles and Hector were likely real warriors whose deeds, through the magnifying lens of oral tradition, were elevated to mythic status. Homer needed heroes to carry the weight of his narrative, and the champions of the Iliad embodied the ideal virtues of their respective cultures, the fierce, individualistic rage of Achilles versus the dutiful, community-focused honor of Hector. Their duel, while perhaps exaggerated, stands as a poetic representation of the two sides of the Bronze Age world clashing. The most iconic and improbable element of the story is the Trojan horse. It is a narrative masterstroke, the perfect symbol of guile and deception. But did a massive, hollow wooden structure truly hold the Achaean elite? The historical truth is far more likely to be a metaphor or a severe simplification of a technical detail. The most popular scholarly interpretations suggest a few possibilities. 1. A clever military tactic. It represents an ingenious ruse that allowed a small, elite force to infiltrate the city, perhaps through a hidden passage or a gate left open by a supposed defector. 2. A siege engine. The host may have been the name of a massive, mobile siege tower or battering ram covered in wet horse hides for protection against fire. The name would then have passed down through oral tradition, gradually morphing into the literal, hollow wooden horse we know today. 3. An earthquake connection. The god Poseidon was known in Greek mythology as the earthshaker, and his sacred animal was the horse. One theory suggests that the Trojan horse was a poetic explanation for an earthquake, Poseidon's horse, that weakened the city's walls enough for the Greeks to finally breach them. Given the evidence for a seismic event at Troy 6, this adds a fascinating layer of interpretation. Myth and reality blur in the dust of time. But the echoes of war, ambition, and human drama remain. The Trojan War, therefore, stands not as a binary choice between myth and history, but as a compelling example of their profound overlap. Behind every legend lies a fragment of truth. The Trojan War may be far more real than was ever imagined during the centuries when Homer's verses were read purely as poetry. The archaeological layers of his Iliad, the geopolitical context of the Bronze Age, and the documentary evidence from the Hittite archives all conspire to support the idea that a devastating conflict took place around 1200 BC between a coalition of Mycenaean kingdoms and the powerful city situated at the Dardanelles. The war may not have been won by divine interference or a giant wooden animal, but by the brutal necessities of siege warfare, economic ambition, and political will. The Iliad is not a history textbook, but it is a monumental work of poetry that allows us a glimpse, however embellished, into the ancient world's struggles and triumphs. It preserves the memory of a historic struggle whose scale and impact were so great that it became the defining cultural story of Western civilization.